Good morning. I hope everybody's looking forward to a good weekend, and I hope I am able to tie together measure for measure a little bit as we start getting ready to take the quiz on Monday and have Alfonso's presentation, and then move on to Henry IV. I do think that as we run through this concluding presentation, like I said, I hope I have gotten to the point where I'm able to provide a way to tie it up and preserve the idea that perhaps there is some comedy here, even though, we may or may not um, want to think it's the funniest play Shakespeare ever wrote. Again, Monday, Measure for Measure quiz, Alfonso presents. Then we're going to have Henry IV. Um, and paper threes due, please remember, on the 30th. One of the things that I talked about when I talked about the comedies and the overlap of the comedies was this idea of agency. How much control do we have over our lives? And look, Shakespeare has dealt with agency in a lot of different ways. Those of you who read Romeo and Juliet when you were in high school, I am fortune's fool. The idea that fortune controls me, I have no control. From class, when we read King Lear, we have the Earl, Gloucester's speech where he says, "As flies to wanton boys, are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport." In other words, the gods are just out to get us, the gods are controlling us, and we are totally screwed. At the same time, Cassius tells Brutus in Julius Caesar that the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves that we are underlings. In other words, we have some control, or we should take some control. And so people have control over their lives, at least some of it, according to Cassius. Gloucester says, gods kill us for their sport. We have no choice. At the same time, as we were looking at these plays, we understood that it was more than just free will and the gods, that humans got in on the act as well. Cassius, when he gave Brutus that line about the fault, dear Brutus, is in our not in our stars but in ourselves, he was trying to manipulate Brutus into joining the conspiracy. Iago spends the whole play manipulating Rodrigo and Othello. Lady Macbeth at the start is manipulating Macbeth, getting him to, you're going to kill Duncan, you're going to be king. Edmund manipulates Gloucester into disinheriting Edgar. And Cesario was tasked with manipulating Olivia. So we have all of these people trying to trick, trying to gain control over others in some way. And so not only is it fate and free will, it is other people trying to manipulate free will uh, to, to their advantage, or in Cesario's case, to his employer's advantage or her employer's advantage. In Measure for Measure, we also have this idea of government. Notice that Claudio calls it the demigod authority, and he talks about the words of heaven: on whom it will, on whom it will not, so. Yet still 'tis just. Remember, there's the Bible verses about God sends rain to the just and the unjust. And Claudio was putting the government in line with that. Claudio also talks about the fact that he has no self control. Remember, the idea of government includes not just the government as in Washington, D.C., or in Pierre, or wherever your state capital is, or the county courthouse, or whatever it is that's controlling people. The idea of government is, can people control themselves? Can people do something to control their emotions, their desires, their rage? Claudio says, I had too much liberty. And so when there's eating too much is the father of fasting because you've consumed everything. all the immoderate use finally forces people to restrain themselves. And our natures, human nature, does chase like rats chasing the poison. They eat it and then they die, but they can't stop themselves. So Claudio is talking about government as in it'll do what it wants to the just and the unjust. And he's also talking about government as in can he govern himself? And I think we can go on. I don't have a slide for it, but we should certainly think of Angelo and whether Angelo can govern himself. Now, the Duke talks about his government, and he talks about the same thing happening. We have strict statutes and biting laws. In other words, we have everything we need to govern people. At the same time, we have let it slip. And because we have been weak and our nature has been to let things slide, now there isn't much governing at all. And liberty plucks justice by the nose. Liberty is leading justice around because the laws aren't being enforced. All sorts of bad stuff is happening. So the Duke is admitting that his own weakness, his own ability to govern himself properly, has made his government, as in the government of the city, go bad. And so now he embodies both. And as he embodies both, I think it's important to remember that there's an internal conundrum. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls of government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place oblige it to control itself. The Duke apparently can't govern the governed. Angelo apparently can't govern himself. And I think when you take those two things into consideration, you kind of have a mess. And that mess, I think, could have probably been played for better laughs, but it's one of the things that drives the play. The other thing I think we have to talk about is how people manipulate it. Some people try to manipulate for good by disguising themselves. Edgar and Kent in King Lear both disguise themselves to do good. Olivia disguises herself to keep herself alive. She's a woman shipwrecked on a foreign shore. Disguising herself as a man seemed to be the best course of action until she could figure out who to trust. The Duke, on the other hand, I think we start having a problem because we see that A, he's a manipulator, and B, he disguises himself, and he uses that disguise not necessarily for helping specific people, but he uses that disguise, I think, to manipulate more. All right? He's manipulating Angelo by putting him in charge. He's manipulating Isabella. He's manipulating all of these people. He's manipulating. And he's using the disguise of a friar to do it. For example, she'll take the enterprise upon her, father, if you advise it. It is not my consent, but my entreaty too. And remember, he's not saying this is the Duke. He is saying this as the dressed as a friar. And they're going to go along with his plan. Isabella's not going to sleep with Angelo. Mariana is, and we're going to have then this marriage contract consummated. And there's all of this manipulation going on, all of this complication going on. And the Duke is the one behind it. And as I said in class on Wednesday, it seems to me he could have done this in a far simpler manner, returned home, or, showing up as in the palace and said, "This is what's going to happen." And then I think we have, him reminding Mariana that this is the what's going to happen here. That this is, not a sin, even though Claudio is about to be killed for doing the same thing. And once he's back as the Duke, he's doing the proposal. If he be like your brother, for his sake is he pardoned. And for your lovely sake, give me your hand and say you will be mine. He is my brother too, but fitter time for that. So now all of a sudden, out of nowhere, comes this proposal. And I think as you think about the proposal, how is this different than what Angelo did? Angelo says, I'm going to kill him unless you sleep with me. He says, I'm going to free him. But there's this hint of, you know, maybe you should marry me. Is this worse because she's got this hope and now it's kind of questionable whether she's trusting the right guy? And as we're at the end of the play, playing the odds that she refuses, or even thinking about whether she can refuse, is a question about justice, but it is a question about agency in the sense of, is she being manipulated? Is she being played? Is she being pushed in a direction she doesn't want to by the government and by a guy who doesn't want to govern himself? The other thing I think that has given us problem with this play is the ending. The ending, as I've just hinted, is open-ended, and we really don't know for sure what she's going to say. We had better endings in almost every other play. Almost every other play. Antony and Octavius win, and they call it a happy day, and they're going to honor Brutus because so mixed his life was gentle and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, this was a man. Let's give him all the respect and rites of burial. Most like a soldier ordered honorably, so called to field rest. The peace is on. We'll part the glories of this happy day. Everybody's going to get something. Brutus is going to get honor because that's what he strove for his whole life. Everybody in the play kind of gets something. Malcolm, I've won. I'm king. We're going to get crowned at Scone. He's calling the Thanes earls, the first time that's ever happened. And we're going to, perform measure, time, and place. Everybody's going to get what's coming to them. It is, as far as a tragedy can go, littered with bodies in the stage, still a happy ending. At the end of Othello, again, we have dead people, but, somebody's going to get the fortunes of the Moor, and we're just going to move on to another day. We're going to have a bunch of marriages in Twelfth Night, and we're going to try to entreat Malvolio to peace. Life seems pretty good. Lear, however, Kent says, I'm not going to rule the kingdom. And the final line, the oldest have borne the most. We that are young shall never see so much nor live so long. What is that? Is there hope that we won't see all the bad stuff? Or is there just, we're screwed? It's a much more open-ended thing. And again, slandering of Plinth deserves, getting married off to the hooker that you don't really like. Claudio, you got to get married. Angelo, you got to love her. I've confessed her even though I wasn't a priest. That kind of gets a little weird. Aeschylus, you paid me a bunch of compliments. You're going to get uh, you know, good stuff to happen. Provost, you were kind of secret and sneaky. You're going to get good stuff to happen because you were secret and sneaky. And, you know, Angelo, you have to forgive him. No choice. The offense pardons itself. And then, oh, by the way, Isabel, let's get married. Okay. If you're a willing, you're inclined. What's mine is yours. What's yours is mine. But let's go to the palace and we're going to show you what's going on here. We're going to show you everything in the palace behind closed doors. And we don't know kind of how much pressure he's putting on her. We don't know anything else about this. And it just seems like it's not a firm, happy ending with the marriages, that the marriages are what the heck is going to happen tomorrow. Just like much with Lear. What the heck is going to happen tomorrow? Finally, I want to close this off with a connection. The connection is going to lead to what I believe is an 8-word theme. I've been reading this book entitled The Woman Who Smashed Codes. I read, I don't know, just a few minutes every night before I go to bed. And it's a story of love, spies, and the unlikely heroine who outwitted America's enemies. And the woman's name is Elizabeth Friedman, and she and her husband, William Friedman, started smashing codes for the United States government in World War I. They did it to catch bootleggers during Prohibition, and they smashed codes against both the Nazis and the Japanese Imperial Army in World War II. They began, and this is the connection to Shakespeare, they began working for an eccentric millionaire and a lady who was a nutcase, I think I'll just use that term, who believed that hidden inside Shakespeare's folios were secret codes that proved that Francis Bacon wrote Shakespeare and also was the completion of a Francis Bacon work. I believe it was called The New Atlantis. The next slide is going to have the 8-word summary. I should set it up that it's in response to a guy who did kind of a tell-all about his life as a code smasher, only he lied a bunch. And William Friedman didn't think that was the right thing to do. And so we have this quotation from the book that I think sums up why we're having some of the problems with the play that we're having. William Friedman found this loose attitude intolerable. Truth was truth, and anything else was effery. And I think when we're dealing with this play, if we have that as the attitude, that truth is truth and anything else is effery, then I do think we get to what's going on in the play. Because we don't know for sure who's being truthful and who's being deceitful, we're having a lot of trouble dealing with what's happening at the end. And so there's my 8-word theme. Those of you who are in class will have a chance to talk about it. If you're not in class, probably on Monday, I'll be asking you what you think. Hope everybody has a good weekend. And remember, there's the quiz on Monday.